Paul Harris.
In for McGraw in the Morning on KTRS.
All right, it's 12 minutes after 7 o'clock now. Sam Donaldson, the ABC News correspondent, joins us each week at this time, and there's so much to talk about this morning. But first, let's see if he's snowed in. Sam, how are things in Washington today?
Mr. Harris, we were expecting 10 to 12 inches. The town has come to a complete halt, which, of course, is nothing new. This time, though.
From my years there in Washington in the 80s and 90s, I know a quarter inch of snow was enough to cancel school in Fairfax County. So they're probably planning on never going back again with 12 inches
true.
coming.
And drivers in Washington, one flake of snow, and drivers go bat, just can't do it.
Yeah. All right, here's something just breaking this morning that I wanted to ask you about. The Special Inspector General for Iraq Reconstruction, Stuart Bowen, is going to release a report today about the huge amounts of money that we have wasted in the 10 years we've been in that country. We're coming up on the 10th anniversary of shock and awe. And since then, the report says that Iraq is still so unstable and broken that looking back on the $60 billion or more that we have spent there, it has essentially been too much money for too few results. Here's my question for you. Will we see any fallout from this in Washington?
I doubt we'll see anything dramatic because people are locked in on Iraq. Just as to an extent, the older guys are still locked in on Vietnam. You take your position, you're going to stick to it regardless of the facts or regardless of new evidence. Now, of course, the Inspector General is talking about the use of money. The political result is more important, I suppose. And people still believe somehow that getting Saddam Hussein out of there will make Israel safer. My view is with the Shiites now in control, and making common cause perhaps with their Shiite brethren in Iran, Israel may be less safer. The doctrine of unintended consequences. So take your choice. Is it money or is it policy that really should be measured from the standpoint of whether we did the right thing or not?
Well, the ironic thing about it is, it's one thing to get a leader out who you believe to be evil or believe has WMDs, which, of course, we found out were not. And, of course, the real history, as you know, of Saddam Hussein was that we propped him up in place there back in the Reagan years, and then later on soured on him. But the real story here is all the money that we have spent building up Iraq, working on their infrastructure, and the irony is we don't have the money to do that here at home now.
Well, that's true, plus the fact that we Americans are idealists in a way, and we believe somehow that the rest of the world, wants to be democratic. They want a democracy. They want to be introduced to Thomas Jefferson. The fact is they don't. We believe our system, as I do, better than the other systems, but we keep thinking that we can make people understand that. First at the point of a bayonet, and then after that, throw lots of money.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't work that way.
It
hasn't worked that way in Iraq.
I'm going to say something that may seem like heresy, Sam, but I think democracy is overrated because anybody who's ever been with a group of 10 people who were deciding to go out to dinner and found that they had to go eat Indian food whether they wanted to or not because the majority ruled, that's how you end up with the Muslim Brotherhood running Egypt, and you run into problems in other countries where people we don't like end up running that. I'm much more in favor of freedom than I am in favor of democracy.
But see, if those 10 people, you're right, if 6 or 7 of them say, let's go eat Indian food, the other 3 think, gag about it, is the alternative to make one of the other 3 the dictator who says, never are we going to have Indian food. Well, now the other 6, they're behind the 8 ball. So let's I'm going to argue with you about whether democracy, as bad as it is, as Churchill said, is the worst form of government except every other.
That's very true. All right, now speaking of bad governments, Hugo Chavez died yesterday in Venezuela. This is a guy who has been one of those evil dictators, another American hater. What holds in our future for relationships between the U.S. and Venezuela now that he's gone?
Well, he actually had become a dictator to a large extent, but he won elections. I'm afraid that it wasn't just Chavez, and now everybody's going to love the United States. Wrong. Venezuela has been moving to the left under Chavez, but there is no indication it's going to snap back toward the right. And remember, in 1956, those of us with a long memory know that Richard Nixon, the Vice President of the United States, had his motorcade stoned in Caracas so badly that President Eisenhower had to send troops to the Caribbean in case they were needed. We've never had a really good relationship with Venezuela. We've had an okay relationship, and of course, because of the oil, we'd like to repair that if for no other reason.
We lost the presidential limousine in Venezuela?
No, the vice president, Mr. Nixon, was
Oh,
there,
Nixon.
and the mobs, they didn't like the United States then. They stoned his motorcade, not just briefly, but they kept up a rage against him for several hours. And again, President Eisenhower worried for his safety.
Wow. All right, back to the Middle East for a moment here. Stories now about Iran and nukes are resurfacing. Considering what we were just talking about all the money that's been wasted in Iraq and Afghanistan, not to mention all the precious American blood that has been shed there, not only in Americans who have died fighting these wars in those countries, but also the tens of thousands who have been injured and the hundreds of thousands of civilians who've lost their lives in those countries. Do you think Americans have a taste for going to war with Iran?
Well, I think we have a taste to follow what our leaders and leaders have, that Iran could be dangerous with a nuclear weapon against Israel and against other countries, as a matter of fact, because they would like to be the major country in that part of the world. We have nuclear weapons, but I think most people accept that although we use them against the Japanese, we're unlikely to use them against anyone else at the moment. But Iran is not in that case. So I think it is prudent to say, when our president says we must never allow Iran to have an operational, deliverable nuclear arsenal, that we ought to follow that and not allow it.
You know, do you think that we're the ones who will take action against them should they get to that point, or will Israel take action and we, as their colleague on the freedom front, will have to defend them and go to war with Iran as well?
Well, no prime minister of Israel could not take action if, in fact, it appeared that Iran had that capability and was about to use it. I mean, and so we would, of course, aid Israel in that route. But whether our bombers would do it or Israeli bombers overflying other countries, Arab countries, who would wink and nod at it, I can't tell you at this point. But there are operational plans for both in case they're needed.
Iran, of course, says that all their nuclear activities are peaceful. Do we believe them?
No. And, of course, there's no reason to believe them. They keep going. And every once in a while you read how, okay, they've agreed to talk. Have you seen anything right now, for instance? They say they'll talk, but no action.
Yep.
They keep building these centrifuges. They keep building new facilities to try to perfect a weapon. I mean, that's just a fact.
Yep, and they're not letting the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, get in there and inspect, and that tells us bad things, doesn't it?
Well, I think it does. Now, the IAEA gets in some, but they don't get to every place. I mean, that's the thing. The mullahs who run Iran clearly are bent on allowing the government, Ahmadinejad, to pursue this kind of course, because we're dealing with deep religious beliefs. And the religious belief is perhaps to cut off my head and your head, which we don't have to subscribe to. We don't have to agree with that. But they are motivated by their God. And it's hard to talk to people who say, God has told us to do this.
Sam Donaldson in Washington, good luck in the snow. It's always a pleasure.
You bet. Bye-bye.
This is the Big 550 KTRS.